Hi, this is Eileen from Medical Home. We're going to start the presentation now. Dr. Turchi?
Hi, this is Renee Turchi. Welcome to today's webinar, The Basics, Substance Use and Behavioral Health in Adolescents. This is provided through a collaboration between the Pennsylvania Medical Home Initiative, which is a program of the Pennsylvania chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics and funded by the Pennsylvania Department of Health. This webinar, led by Dr. Schlesinger, aims to recognize the overlap of substance use disorders and common behavioral health disorders such as depression, anxiety, ADHD, and also to identify 2 tools for screening for adolescent substance use risk, and to define methods to help adolescents and families when substance use risk is identified. My name is Dr. Renee Turchi, and I'm a pediatrician at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children and medical director of the Pennsylvania Medical Home Initiative at the Pennsylvania chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available on both the Pennsylvania Medical Home Initiative website and will be posted on the University of Pittsburgh Internet-Based Studies and Education and Research website. For CME purposes, please be advised that none of the speakers today have any disclosures. Please note that the information presented in this webinar is educational in nature and does not necessarily represent the views nor the policies of the Pennsylvania chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics or its funders. Now, please allow me to introduce Dr. Abigail Schlesinger. Dr. Abigail Schlesinger is the Chief Behavioral Science Division, UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, and the Medical Director of the Children's TIPS Telephonic Psychiatric Services Program. She is the Associate Service Chief of Child and Adolescent Ambulatory Services and the Medical Director of Integration at the UPMC Western Psychiatric Hospital. She is an Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. Dr. Schlesinger helped create Children's Community Pediatrics Behavioral Health Program, which provides early access to integrated behavioral health services right in the pediatrician's offices. She's devoted her career to improving how we talk about and treat mental health issues. We are delighted to have Dr. Schlesinger present on this timely and important topic for primary care clinicians. Dr. Schlesinger, thank you for being with us today, and at this time you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Renee. I'm not sure whether I need to unmute, so I'm going to do it just in case. Thank you, Renee, and thank you, everyone, for calling in today to talk about the basic substance use and behavioral health in adolescents. This is a pretty large topic, so obviously you're not going to leave this 50 minutes or so as an expert in substance use, but I really hope that you leave here feeling like you've developed more understanding of how the 2 very common things interact in pediatrics. And as Dr. Turchi suggested, we're going to talk about the overlap of substance use with depression, anxiety, and ADHD. We're going to talk about 2 tools for screening. And then as the third goal, I want to expose you to the methods to help adolescents and families when substance use risk is identified. Just so you know what the outline is here, first we're going to talk about some facts, and then about substance use going on in the community. We'll talk about the relationship of substance use to these common concerns. We'll talk about SBIRT, which is screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. Then we'll talk about some things you can suggest to parents in terms of anticipatory guidance, which I got from drugfreekids.org. I'd highly recommend that site if you have any questions about drug and alcohol in adolescents. And then just some basics about when treatment is needed for substance use, what things as a pediatrician might be, or family practice doctor dealing with adolescents, it might be useful to know about treatment. So selected self-reported facts. This is from the Monitoring the Future data set. And this data set they've done high school surveys since the mid-70s. They started with 12th graders, 50,000 a year, and in about the early 90s they started doing 8th and 10th graders. So we have a lot of information about what these teens report they think about and what they say what they're willing to admit they do in terms of substance use. So though obviously self-report has its downsides, right? We're not going to get the whole story. The fact that we have this data set going back to the 70s really gives an interesting look into what teens are willing to say about substance use. It's really the best sample out there. They have a huge website. If anybody ever wants any specific information about substances, you can go there, and they have all of their data available for anyone to see. I tried to pick out some more useful things for a primary care physician working with adolescents. So I put on the right here, I just drew that right off the site. So lifetime use of drugs. So this is kids that are willing to admit that they've used any illicit drug at the top here. And that there was an increase leading up to 2016 to 17, but it looks like the number of kids admitting to illicit use is stabilizing in 2018. That could change again in 2019. As is been seen every year, there's always a significant increase between the 8th graders that report lifetime use and the 10th graders that report lifetime use. This is why screening at age 11 to 12 really makes a difference, because you can catch kids before they've had any lifetime use, actually. And most of the increase in lifetime use appears to be attributed to pot use. So marijuana, as we all know, is there. It's everywhere now. And it wouldn't surprise me, frankly, if we see an increase in 2019 in overall use, not related to use of heroin or anything else, but related to more pot use. And although we talk about inhalants and hallucinogens, certainly we talk about inhalants with younger kids, that use is relatively low if you look all the way at the bottom. The inhalants are under 10%. But interestingly, 8th graders report more lifetime use than 10th or 12th graders. So this data is on binge drinking, the risk associated with binge drinking, the disapproval, and the availability. So the important thing here is that from self-report, teens are reporting that binge drinking is going down. And the perception of risk associated with binge drinking remains between 40 and 60% for all grades. So essentially, if you ask an 8th, 10th, or 12th grader, around half of them, give or take 10%, will say they think binge drinking is bad. But as kids get older, they're less likely to think that it's risky. So there is a misunderstanding as kids get older, perhaps because they've seen kids binge drink or they've seen one binge drink and survive, that they think that it's not a risky behavior. On a good note, disapproval of binge drinking is rising among seniors, suggesting that they're getting some sort of message that binge drinking could be harmful. And availability, as probably no one's surprised, so availability of alcohol increases substantially between 8th grade and 12th grade. So 12th graders report that they can get a hold of alcohol a lot easier than 8th graders can. This is heroin perception, and I put that just so you can see that, first of all, use is pretty low and dropping in this up to 18th group. Risk is pretty high if you look at to the right of use, and disapproval is pretty high in this group too. So kids, adolescents get it, that heroin is a problem, and availability seems to be dropping. So narcotic use and availability, this also seems to be dropping. And that really non-heroin narcotic use is driven predominantly by Vicodin. That should say and OxyContin, not OxyContin, I think. Yeah. But all of these are going down. So there's some suggestion to think that in the adolescents they're getting the message that heroin and narcotic use is bad, and they're reporting less use and reporting less availability even. And despite what you may hear all over the media, there's even a suggestion that the amphetamine misuse, that both the use and availability is dropping. The use and availability of amphetamines really peaked in the 70s. And if you look, it's just a clear line down in terms of availability. Now, this is for adolescents that aren't in college. They have started doing a college survey. I didn't put this data in here. And the use of amphetamines, so the misuse of stimulants, is increasing in college students. So something is going on between that high school and college age time. Cigarette use is down and just continues to drop. If you look at that availability all the way on the right-hand side at the bottom, the availability of cigarettes has just continually dropped over the last 15 years. And there's even a fairly high understanding of risk. Even over 70% of kids report they think using cigarettes is risky. And half of pack-a-day use of cigarettes is pretty low. I mean, 0.3% for 8th graders, 0.7% for 10th graders, 1.5% for 12th graders. That's the good news. Something's gone right, really probably starting with the MTV move in the 90s to really make cigarette use not cool. Unfortunately, vaping is showing up in its stead, which you all, if you treat adolescents, are probably noticing. So they only started asking questions about vaping in the last 3 years, but those lines look almost vertical. So this is vaping in the last 30 days. This increase was the largest increase they've ever seen for 12th and 8th graders in the period of time for any substance that they've been doing these reviews. And all types of vaping went up, vaping that include pot, tobacco, or just flavoring. And 1 in 5 seniors reported use in the last 30 days. This is like a substantial increase, and it was a substantial increase in every single group, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. The increasing reports about vaping suggest concerns also that even seniors may not know whether they're getting tobacco, marijuana, or not getting marijuana, and so they may not even know what they're getting in their vaping devices. Another important thing to note about vaping is even if they know they're getting tobacco, they may not know how much they're getting. And a lot of providers don't even recognize how much they're getting right now. So if you remember on the last slide, I said that the use of half pack per day of cigarettes is down, and that's a good news because that's quite an addictive behavior. But the use of Juuls, 1 Juul pod a day is the equivalent to a whole pack per day. So I have to say in the last 3 months, the number of kids I've seen that are doing a whole Juul pod a day has gone up substantially, and they have no idea that they're addicted to it. So for those of you who don't know, the FDA has really come out and tried to get at least the Juuling packaging changed, but they're having a lot of trouble with it. So this is really something we all need to stay alert to and recognize that kids are getting physically addicted to the tobacco in Juul. So mental health and substance use. I wish we knew more about the overlap of these two. I wish we knew more about substance use in general. I just gave you some of the best data out there, but even that's not perfect. And when you start looking at the overlap, there just aren't enough people really looking at this overlap. But since I like to start with the take-home points, essentially adolescents with psychiatric conditions like depression, anxiety, and ADHD are at higher risk of developing a substance use problem. Risk is higher when adolescents have difficulty regulating their thoughts and emotions. So obviously all of those concerns we talked about above, depression, anxiety, and ADHD, have difficulty with regulating emotions attached to them. And you don't even need to have those 3 diagnoses to have difficulty with regulating your emotion. And managing and treating underlying psychiatric conditions is important for reducing risk and preventing co-occurring disorders. There's actually a fair amount of data even showing that treating ADHD aggressively can reduce the negative behaviors associated with substance use, especially if they're impulsive. And parents of children with psychiatric conditions should be vigilant about the possibility of their adolescent using drugs or alcohol. I think this is where we in primary care and psychiatry and behavioral health really can have a role helping parents stay vigilant to the possibility that drugs and alcohol could be seeping into their world and to get kids help when they need it. So some more data. So these are in kids with ADHD. So kids with ADHD are more likely to use tobacco. We don't have vaping data for this group yet, but I bet it's higher too. They're 2 times as likely to report use, but then nearly 3 times as likely to report dependence in adolescents. Interestingly, they're not more likely to use alcohol, but almost 2 times more likely to get full criteria for abuse or dependence if they use alcohol. So suggesting that they do have a unique vulnerability to really accruing abuse and dependence behaviors. They are more likely to use pot and also twice as likely to develop abuse and dependence, also showing that unique risk these impulsive ADHD kids may have to getting abuse and dependence criteria fulfilled. And then for other illicit drugs, it looks like they're more than 2.5 times as likely to develop abuse or dependence if they use. So again, kids with ADHD, like staying away from substances really is the best medicine here, because once they use, they tend to use a lot and get themselves into trouble with it, which is probably not surprising to anyone that's treated a kid with ADHD. Anxiety is a little bit different, and I think we're still trying to get our heads around this. So the relationship to substance use is probably a lot more complex. And it's probably because anxiety is a lot more complex. Although as a culture we tend to talk about anxiety like it's one thing, there really are multiple types of anxiety disorder. You know, there's a performance anxiety disorders, there's obsessions, there's social phobia, and there's some data suggesting that certain types of anxiety may increase your risk and certain types may decrease your risk. Certainly it may be influenced by gender and ethnicity, and really some theories suggesting that, you know, how you interact with peers may impact your risk for substance use. So if you have social phobia and you're never around peers and there are no substances in your home, your chance of developing a substance use disorder are pretty low. Now, once those kids with social phobia get out into the world and they're sort of nervous and alcohol helps them be less nervous, then there might be an increased risk. And although I haven't talked about, this today is not about autism spectrum disorder. We even know even less about that, and there are a number of people in the sort of transition age group that work with autism spectrum disorder that are really worried about their risks associated with substance use because of the inherent difficulties they have with social skills. So oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder, I could probably fill 15 slides with this. Essentially, if you have a kid that has ODD or conduct disorder, they are at a really high risk of substance use. In fact, the risk is so high and the relationship is so common that it actually has made it hard for us to better understand the relationship of ADHD. So, you know, if there's one thing to take home here is that oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder really confers a unique and strong risk to the development of substance use disorder. Now, as I alluded to and as you all know, ADHD and ODD and conduct disorder are connected. Not all kids have all three, but many kids with ADHD have comorbidities. And there certainly are some controlled studies that shown that treating ADHD reduces the likelihood that these kids will have impulsive behaviors that put them at more risk related to substance use. So I know people get nervous treating ADHD in the context of dual diagnosis such as ODD or conduct disorder, but these are actually the kids that we need to be most concerned about and maybe even might have the most potential benefit from early intervention. Since these kids are young and impulsive, the diagnosis comes early, they can get into substances quite early. So depression also is maybe we're still learning what the true relationship is, but we do know that alcohol use may increase the risk of suicide, which is concerning because the overall risk of suicide has been going up. And there's been some suggestion that maybe it's because these kids with depression are less able to moderate their emotions when they're depressed. Anyone that's ever seen anyone using alcohol knows what happens to people that have strong emotions when they use substances. Adolescents already have some trouble moderating those things, so alcohol just sort of takes the brake off even further. And for that reason, the combination of depression and suicide is a big risk we need to be concerned about. Even increasing evidence suggesting that people admitted for alcoholism up through their 30s or 40s are at increased risk of dying for suicide after admission to the hospital. And then, you know, you hear a lot about the self-medication hypothesis. I think that's not that proven. What we do know is if you have both depression and any substance use, you need to aggressively treat both. I haven't said it yet, so I'll say it now. As we all know, the brain grows up and is really sort of pruning and forming itself up through age 25. So it's really important that we give the youth the best amount of chance to sort of exist in a world where they're not being impacted by bad depression or by bad substance use, which can markedly alter the development of your brain. There is some emerging evidence suggesting that SSRIs don't work as well in the context of substance use, alcohol, pot. We still treat with SSRIs because that's the best we've got to offer, but definitely when you talk to people in the substance use field, the importance of having therapy along with treatment, whether it be pharmacologic or substance use treatment, is really vital. and kids aren't going to get better with just Prozac if they have depression along with substance use, even if they say one came first. So pot, I could also probably fill many, many slides with this, with both what we know and what we don't know so far. But, you know, one thing that I think is really important at this point that has really struck me is how much cannabis use is related to the early onset of psychosis. There's a lot out there about pot now that's being pushed by, frankly, the industry. You know, the same industry that pushed cigarettes 20 years ago, those people are out there pushing pot. And you don't see as much written that, like, really that cannabis use can be related to early onset of psychosis. We don't know who's predisposed yet. We know that certainly having a pre-existing psychiatric disorder puts you in the possible criteria of people that are at risk. But we don't know who's predisposed yet. But we do know that with more use, you're seeing more psychosis across the U.S. and every state that's had more use. And there appears to be a dose-dependent relationship. So the more marijuana someone uses, the more likely they are to develop psychosis. And it works in both directions, actually, as well. So the relationship between pot and psychosis is something that a lot of people are starting to look at. People are going to make careers out of this, and that's scary to me, and something to watch out for if you have a kid that's starting to use marijuana, say because they think it helps with their, quote, anxiety. Sometimes anxiety is a premorbid psychotic symptom, and those kids could really be at risk. So screening tools, you know, I hope I made the argument that substance use is real, it's a pediatric concern, and that really pediatricians have a role in helping identify kids early that are using and helping sort of move their trajectory in a different direction. And I'm going to talk about two screening tools today, CRAFT, which probably many of you have heard about, maybe even used in your residencies, and the Screening to Brief Intervention tool, which was developed in the Boston Children's Hospital. It's validated for use with adolescents, screens for type and frequency of substance use, and it was really validated in pediatrics. So screening is really part of an evidence-based process that any pediatrician can do. And today we're just going to give you a little piece of screening, but if anyone wants to learn more, there will be opportunities in the future to join learning collaboratives we have to learn more about how to do screening, brief intervention, or referral to treatment, because it's really a skill that can put you in control as a pediatrician, a primary care physician, to really feel like you're not helpless in dealing with these kids. So let's talk a little bit before we screen about making sure we understand some definitions here. So binge drinking. So for boys, 9 to 13, a binge is 3 drinks. For girls, 9 to 17, it's 3 drinks. For boys, 14 and 15, it's 4 drinks, and for girls, it's 5 drinks, 18 and above. This is an old picture, but still true in terms of how much is considered one standard drink. I think it's important to note that most kids don't drink this way, and that most beer, that a lot of beer these days is more than 7% alcohol, and very many cups for beer aren't even in 8 to 9 fluid ounces anymore, they're in 20, and very few kids actually use shot glasses. So there are things out there to help educate kids about what a binge is, but if they use these old pictures, it's not going to really mean that much to kids. There's for boys, 5 drinks is a binge. This is one way that teens drink, the red Solo cup, and I have to say, until I started doing this, I was not an expert in this, I've learned more every day, that these Solo cups actually have these lines in them to show you where you could fill alcohol to have a certain amount of alcohol. So that bottom line on a typical red Solo cup is 1.5 ounces of liquor. That second line is 5 ounces of wine, and that top line is 12 ounces of beer, which is the second from the top line. So, you know, not that I would suggest that teens go and like fill only to that amount, but when you talk to teens, they have no idea how much they're putting in cups. And the odds that they're putting liquor in and putting more than 1.5 ounces is pretty high. So, and this, on the left-hand side, 1 cup of jungle juice, which I guess is a common type of drink teens drink, is actually the equivalent of 5 or 6 shots. So essentially you have yourself a binge in 1 Solo cup. Well, actually, one more thing about this before we go on is I don't have a slide of it. But also remember the other way, not an infrequent way that kids are drinking is in water bottles these days. And a water bottle is more than 8 or 9 ounces too, so it can be a fair amount of alcohol in one water bottle. So there is a traditional continuum of substance use, and I'm going to give you one that I think is more useful for at least me when I think about substance use. So when you thought about substance use, traditionally we used to talk about there's abstinence, there's responsible use, and then there's addiction. And that, you know, if people were in the abstinence or responsible use, maybe they'd be okay, and that we really needed to worry about the kids, the people that were in the addiction phase. Now, we know that's not even true for adults anymore, but especially for kids, where even there is no responsible use for kids over and over again, and not just in the U.S., but around the world. They've shown that actually abstaining from any use of including alcohol, improves brain development and decreases the likelihood of developing a disorder. So, you know, Nancy Reagan didn't have it entirely wrong when she said just say no, because not using actually is an effective way to not get into trouble. But the other issue is that when kids do use, they tend to binge, and they tend to do things that may get themselves in trouble. So although I strongly believe in harm reduction for those who have developed problems, I also believe that we should have a clear message to kids that that there is no such thing as responsible use for a teen. It is illegal to use all of these substances we've talked about. So when we talk about SBIRT, screen, brief intervention, and referral to treatment, we tend to want to use a little bit more of an advanced model of thinking about use. So there's abstinence and experimental use. And frankly, most teens are going to fall in this area. And ironically, the kids that are using are going to assume most kids are in the use area, but the truth is that most kids are really going to fall in the abstinence or occasional sort of experimental use area. And then there's a substance use disorder area, which frankly is a very small group. This line doesn't probably pick up sort of who's in the substance use disorder. It's very small. It may even be less than 5%. There are lots of triangles, and I'll show you one next, that suggest that it's around 5% of kids, but it's probably even lower than that, of kids that fulfill a full substance use disorder criteria, because kids are really, really resilient. But what we really need to worry about, and where we can really have an impact, are these kids that are just starting to abuse or have binge use, so that they can stay healthy and continue to grow. So the other thing about adolescents compared to adults is, so they tend to get more activated by alcohol. You know, alcohol in a 40 or 50-year-old may put someone to sleep after a couple drinks. A teenager who has a couple drinks is more likely to get more energy and want to go out and want to get in a car, and now their ability to make decisions is not in a good position. So, and like I said before, and I think it's important to remember, they're just so much more likely to binge than adults. So here's that triangle I was talking about, sort of talking about low risk or abstinence, harmful or hazardous use, and then a substance use disorder, which for adolescents is probably even less than 5%. So the craft, probably many people have done some version of the craft in their life. Have you ever ridden a car driven by someone who was high or had been using alcohol or drugs? Have you ever used alcohol or drugs to relax, feel better about yourself, or fit in? Do you ever use alcohol or drugs while you're by yourself or alone? Do you ever forget things that you did while using alcohol or drugs? Do your family or friends ever tell you should cut down on your drinking or drug use? And have you ever gotten into trouble while using alcohol or drugs? Just say, when I was in medical school, I think we only did this with alcohol, but see how this nicely includes both alcohol and drugs. And some nice studies have been done to show the probability of substance use related to response in all these questions. And, you know, luckily very few kids get all 6 yes, but that is 100% probability of having a substance use disorder. And the probability drops sort of quickly by the time you get down to 1 and 2. So the screen to brief intervention tool is another tool that was created by Sharon Levy in Boston to actually ask kids how much they are using. And this asks about tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana, and then there's a decision point from there. So if they answer positive to any of them, they move on and get additional questions about prescription drugs not prescribed for them, inhalants, illegal drugs, and herbs or synthetic drugs. And this also has a decision tree associated with it. If they say never to the first three, you're supposed to give them positive reinforcement, say, good job, making good choices. If they answer once, twice, monthly, or weekly, you could do anything from positive reinforcement to referral if you need it. But one of the things that we've taken on in children's community pediatrics and our behavioral health system is really trying to help both our behavioral health providers in Western Pennsylvania and our pediatricians to be able to do evidence-based brief interventions, which is what you would do if someone was using monthly or more any of the substances. So we use a lot of terms here, brief advice versus brief intervention, but I'm going to really focus on brief intervention. Brief intervention really, if you've learned about motivational interviewing in your life or heard about it, it really relies on those sort of motivational interviewing principles where you ally with the adolescent. You're non-judgmental, non-confrontational, and you try to enhance the patient's own motivation to change his or her substance use. And, what I've really seen is I've watched pediatricians really take this on and notice that it doesn't take any more time to do an evidence-based intervention with a kid that screens positive than it does to accidentally wag your finger and tell them to stop. Because we all get nervous when we see kids that are addicted to anything, from juuling to heroin, right? And every pediatrician I've ever talked to, when they get a kid that's got significant addiction behaviors, they intervene, they do something. But using this sort of brief intervention approach has really helped the pediatricians we work with feel like they have a little more, they're using a little more evidence-based interventions, and that the kid can leave with a clear goal about what to do next. And we're not going to give you all of the sort of how to do a brief intervention today, but I want to put another plug in again, and I think I'll be talking more about it, putting a plug in it also at the AAP meeting in May, that if anybody's interested in learning more about brief interventions, we're doing training throughout the state to help people develop more skills. Brief advice is sort of one step down from brief intervention. It's also giving medically advised advice with the kid's permission, right? So you want to give, when you give advice, you want to tell kids things they don't know already. It turns out there's lots of things they don't know already if you just think about a few of those slides I had. But you want to give them information they don't know already and engage with them in a conversation about their own strengths and weaknesses. So the take-home point about mental health and substance use, to remind you, is that adolescents with psychiatric conditions like depression, anxiety, and ADHD are at a higher risk for developing substance use. The risk is higher when they have difficulty regulating their thoughts and emotions, which is another reason why treatment helps. And managing and treating underlying psychiatric conditions is important for reducing risk and preventing co-occurring disorders. And parents of children with psychiatric conditions should be vigilant about the possibility of their adolescent using drugs or alcohol. So we've been screening kids in 11 to 8 to 20-year-old visits, well-child visits in Western PA for about 3 years. We do about 7,500 a month. And the good news is very few kids screen at really increased risk. But the screens have really served as an opportunity to talk to parents and kids about substance and make it clear that we talk about substances just like we talk about asthma, just like we talk about diabetes, that these are things that you can come to your pediatrician and that families should be armed with. So, one of the things that people have asked us for is how can parents start the conversation with kids about drugs and alcohol? So, in pediatrics, it's all about anticipatory guidance, and this is where we can have a huge impact. So the fact of the matter is, believe it or not, at 2 to 4, kids are seeing representations on TV of drugs and alcohol. When I first started looking into this in 2013, I was just amazed at how many cartoons people take a potion so they can get happier or sadder or change, and that's similar to taking a drug. So not that you should at age 2 to 4 get into a conversation about heroin, but this is from drugfreekids.org, and all of these I like very much. So vitamins help your body grow, but you'd only take what I give you. Too many vitamins can hurt you and make you sick. So just letting kids know that they should only take the medicines that are given to them or the vitamins that are given them. So this is specifically important because one of the largest growing areas in ER visits in the last 5 years has been actually this preschooler, the 0 to 4-year-old kids taking medicines that were in their home. So really talking to parents about opioids that are in their home, and certainly if you have a parent that has a history of drug abuse and is taking replacement medicines, making sure that they're in an area where they're locked. Early and elementary school age kids, just because it's in the medicine cabinet doesn't mean it's safe for you to take. Even if your friends say it's safe, tell them, no, my parents won't let me take something that doesn't have my name on the bottle. So for those 5 to 8-year-olds, very concrete, giving them something simple to say. As a part of this process of us learning more about this, we had an undergraduate do some research into what's known about younger kids and substances. And apparently by this age, somewhere in the 5 to 8 range, most kids have already formed an idea in their head about whether drug use is good or bad, and they've formed some sort of opinion about it. So again, it's not too young to talk about. Preteens are going to definitely have formed ideas at this point and may even know friends or acquaintances that are using. So calling out, you'll probably hear about kids who are experimenting with drugs and alcohol. I just want you to remember that I'm here for you, and the best thing you can do is talk to me about the stuff you hear or see. And then teenagers, just know that you can talk to us about anything, anytime, even if you do make a mistake or feel stuck in a situation. We won't freak out. We'll figure out a way to help you. We want you to count on us to help you to make smart decisions and stay safe. Obviously, this is not the only thing. There's lots of other things you can say, but notice the developmental perspective here, that at this point, teens have a lot more control of their lives. Another nice thing you can do with teens is come up with, quote, an escape plan for when teens get into situations where their sort of internal barometer is telling them something's not right, or someone's offering them something that they don't want to use. Having some sort of way that they can look at their phone and say you texted them and you're coming to get them, or even having a way that if they quickly texted you, you'd call them and say, like, come home right now. So I think for every family, that escape plan is a little bit different. It's whatever the teen feels most comfortable with. But just coming up with that escape plan really you'll never know when your kid might need it. So, and then young adults at 19 to 25, they have their own choices to make then, but not stopping the conversation. Because really what 19 to 25-year-olds have is a lot of ability to make their own decisions, but not a lot of life experience yet. So, so letting them know that you're there for them, and if they get into any trouble, you want to help. So I added this slide at the direct request of several parents that we worked with whose kids have had substance use problems, and looking back, they wished that they'd recognized what was going on earlier. And this is also from drugfree.org, and it shows some changes that might suggest there's a substance use concern coming on. So we have one parent that goes around and suggests that every parent in the U.S. should put this up in their kitchen. I'm not sure I'd go that far, but I think that if a family is coming to you expressing concerns about their kid, money disappearing, things getting more and more secretive, this is actually available online. You could have them look it up. There's great information on drugfreekids.org. And, you know, printing this out so that a family can sort of X what they've seen and hold on to it and get a kid into at least see a therapist. Because some of these things can be, you know, mood and personality shifts, could be depression, could be anxiety. But cash flow problems, not usually depression and anxiety in my experience. The other nice thing that when you talk to the family members that have been through this, that they always remind me is, like, if parents open their nose and their eyes, they'll see a lot of things. So the nice thing is this reminds you that it's not just behaviors. It could be smells. It could be changes in people's appearance. So luckily, most teens that have behavioral health problems aren't going to have substance use problems. Most teens aren't going to have behavioral health problems. and certainly a smaller number of them are going to have both. But there are some kids that need substance use treatment, and one thing we hear from parents chronically is that they feel undersupported by the whole community. Pediatricians, family practice, psychiatry, therapists, they feel like when their kid starts developing substance concerns, or they have concerns for their kid, that all of a sudden the professionals, many of them don't have any idea what to do. So although this is a very quick overview, and I don't expect any of you to become substance use providers from this, I at least hope that if a family comes in and says, my kid's getting treatment, or I think they need treatment, you'll at least have an idea of the sort of breadth of evidence-based interventions available. And you should know that something we've been working on actually across the U.S. they're working on, but in Pennsylvania, we're working on getting more providers trained to understand both substance use and behavioral health, so that it's not like a parent's got to figure out which one's the problem and get them to the right place. I think historically the two have been siloed when we know they shouldn't be. So there's a lot of effort in Western PA to get both our substance use providers and our behavioral health providers cognizant of all the evidence-based interventions that cross both. So, as an overview, good treatment for an adolescent should address withdrawal. Luckily, adolescents don't go in as much withdrawal as adults. Like, they don't tend to go into alcohol withdrawal as much because they're so healthy. But if a kid's juuling, if a kid's using nicotine, they should get replacement as a part of their treatment. And certainly opioids, once you've gotten into trouble with opioids, your chance for withdrawal goes up. So good treatment should address withdrawal. Nobody would recommend anymore just sort of toughing it out. It should also help the patient realize what role the drug plays in their life. Instead of just saying no, it should be, well, why did you say yes? And how can we help you find other ways to get there? Then help the adolescent find their own reasons to change behavior. But I also strongly believe that good treatment should involve parents. So even though you want the adolescent to find their own reasons to change behavior, involved parents can make all the difference in the world, even if they have a history of substance use themselves. So activated parents can help assure that the kid stays in treatment. They can provide the external motivators for the kids to stay in treatment and stay clean. So, when you look at the data for substance-using teenagers, there's not a lot of data of kids getting into trouble from 0 to 18, and then at 19, the kids fall off the cliff. And probably it's because the parents aren't as involved at that point. So as getting parents involved can really make a difference. And they really should recognize that drug abusing and co-occurring conditions need to be treated. There are still some old school programs out there that say you need to be clean from all drugs, no SSRIs, no treatment for anything. But those are few and far between, and I think less and less every year as we recognize the importance of treating co-occurring conditions. So essentially, treatments for adolescents with substance fall into 4 categories: behavioral, family, medication-assisted, and recovery support services. So behavioral treatments, these are 3 evidence-based treatments for kids: community reinforcement approach, cognitive behavioral therapy, and motivational enhancement therapy. You'll notice cognitive behavioral therapy is what we know works for depression and anxiety too. So the good news is there are sort of shared skills there. But people need to be addressing both the substance use and the depression and anxiety. Motivational enhancement therapy is like cognitive behavioral therapy, except for you literally provide motivational enhancement. It could be paying a kid to stay clean, because we know the more people stay clean, the more likely they are to get better. Community reinforcement approach is a very positive approach that if a parent calls drugfreekids.org and says their kid has a problem, they'll work them through this community reinforcement approach, which is a way to help the kids develop new friendships and rely on the friendships and community reinforcements that are positive as opposed to just their substance-using peers. Family therapy is definitely a good intervention for kids with substance use. Substance use affects the whole family, whether or not families are drug abusers. I broke these down into 2 so that you know. Sometimes you'll hear about, on the bottom, functional family therapy and multidimensional family therapy. Those are really for more complicated, involved cases, which most often you're not going to see as much in pediatrics. But there are brief interventions and just basic family behavioral therapy by someone that understands substance use and isn't taking the, wait till the kids hit rock bottom approach is really the way to go. We've had a few trials here of seeing if we could create something associated with our service. that was associated with primary care. And most of the kids that we've identified, family behavioral therapy is what they needed. So it's really the family coming together to help the kid. Medication-assisted treatment is clearly the evidence-based intervention, especially for opioids. Just so in case you haven't heard them, buprenorphine, methadone, and naltrexone. For alcohol use disorders, acamprosate, disulfiram, which has been around forever, and naltrexone. And then nicotine use disorders, which is bupropion and nicotine replacement therapy, like the patch. So buprenorphine, methadone, and nicotine replacement literally replace the substance that you're addicted to in your body. And the other ones on here, either disulfiram actually causes you to get sick if you drink, and the other ones actually just decrease your long-term chance of using again, even though they don't directly replace. So last is recovery support services. I think everyone's heard of NA and AA, which is the middle of this slide. But there's also other sort of more formalized recovery support services, all the way from assertive continuing care, which is an after treatment, sort of after someone's been to rehab, to peer recovery services, where there are trained peers that have been through substance use that help someone stay in treatment, to recovery high schools. So frankly, the evidence is preliminary for some of these approaches, but very hopeful. In fact, enough that a lot of the insurance plans have been investing in trying to develop these services, because we know just coming to see a therapist once a week isn't going to do the job, and that traditionally NA and AA have taken sort of an abstinence-only response to substance use, and they're moving away from that, but really finding a middle ground is important. So that is my last slide. I ended on there because I think that recovery support is important, whether or not the evidence is totally in yet. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, at this time, if anyone has any questions, please type in the Q&A box. If you're on the phone, you can hit *#6 to unmute your line. Again, that is #6 to unmute your line, or you can type in the Q&A box. Thank you.
Abby, this is Renee. I was just wondering, while some folks maybe are getting some questions together, what have you seen? I mean, you kind of had the bird's eye view of the TIPS program. How has this informed, with the consults that you guys have been getting? Have your trends that you've shared are some national trends? Have you seen all of that mirrored in Pennsylvania, or are there regional trends here in the Commonwealth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, first of all, when you talk about opioids, our state is one of the sort of hardest hit states. We certainly see that throughout PA. The juuling phenomenon I have definitely seen. We've gotten calls and tips about juuling also in my own practice. It's just amazing how quickly it's taken off. So, those are the things that are standing out the most for me right now. The other drugs, I have to say, if you look at these trends over time, Dr. Turchi, drugs go away and then they come back. I mean, someone taught me that my first year of residency, like, things will go away for a generation and then they'll come back. Like, nothing ever goes entirely away. So you have to stay vigilant for any of these coming back. I heard someone say meth is coming back in one, and certainly we see areas in Pennsylvania where there are meth houses exploding. So, I mean, we're not going to get rid of drugs. It's really about managing it and really helping kids to, every year they don't use is better brain development. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Again, if anyone has a question, please type in the Q&A box or hit *6 to unmute your line.
Sometimes I think this can be hard to ask questions about in sort of a larger forum. The kids with the worst problems don't often show up at pediatrics, right? But what's really impressed me is, as we've really started talking about it in Western PA, we're seeing more and more kids, adolescents, maybe early college students that I've just watched pediatricians intervene with in fabulous ways to get them to cut back in their pot use or stop altogether. to stop juuling. We have a kid right now that we're doing a brief intervention on who's addicted to juuling, who his entire friend group uses, and apparently he came in and told our therapist they all want to quit. So we said, well, bring them all in. So, you know, we as doctors really need to be educated about the risks associated with some of these things and give a clear message, but then engage with the family about how to move forward. And I think it's not something we've always talked about overtly, but it's a really important potential role for pediatrics.
Great point, Dr. Schlesinger. I want to thank you. It looks like there's probably no additional questions, and I know that folks know that if they have any questions, they certainly can email Eileen Thompson or the PA, who's at our PA chapter of the AAP, and we can get some questions to you. So at this point, I think this concludes our webinar, and I want to thank you again, Dr. Schlesinger, for your excellent presentation. And I also would like to acknowledge and thank the Pennsylvania Department of Health for the funding that made this webinar possible.